Here's a confession. It seems like every job posting out there is looking for team players, but I've always been more of an individual player. What can I say? I love simple activities that don't rely on anyone or anything to do them. No special equipment needed. For example, I find the concept of taking off for a walk or a run by myself exhilarating. Same goes for yoga. I barely need a mat, just some quiet space. And of course, there's meditation. You don't need candles. You don't need a fancy pillow, although that's nice. You just need to tune in to the present moment. But I do have a tool I carry in my pocket at all times that I find complements my meditation practice and gives it structure, the Headspace app. It gives me my daily dose of mindfulness in the form of guided meditations, and it's so simple to use. Right now, our listeners get a 1-month trial to Headspace's entire library of meditations for free. Just go to headspace.com/snoozecast. This is the best deal offered right now. Head to headspace.com/snoozecast tonight. Millions of Americans experience thinning hair. It's common, but it's not openly talked about, so going through it can feel lonely. It's time to change the conversation and join the thousands of people standing up for their strands with Nutrafol. Nutrafol comes in versions for men and women, and for women, it offers options for different stages of life. As a new mom myself, that's why I'm especially excited to get started with Nutrafol's postpartum option. Does it work? Yes. In clinical studies, Nutrafol users saw thicker, stronger hair growth with less shedding in 3 to 6 months. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and using promo code SNOOZE to save $15 off your first month subscription. This is their best offer available anywhere, and it's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code SNOOZE, for hair as strong as you are. Snoozecast, a podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram @snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you enjoy our show, please write a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Please know that we read and appreciate every single one. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by Egyptian Pyramids. Tonight, we'll read an 1886 short story titled Kashtanka by Anton Chekhov and adapted by Snoozecast. It is a sincere and simple story about loyalty, about a dog named Kashtanka who experiences life with 2 very different masters. It has been speculated that the story is a veiled biography of the author himself. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. One, misbehavior. A young dog, a reddish mutt, between a dachshund and a yard dog, very like a fox in the face, was running up and down the pavement, peering from side to side. From time to time, she stopped and, lifting first one paw and then another, tried to make up her mind how it could have happened that she was lost. She remembered very well how she had passed the day and how, in the end, she had found herself on this unfamiliar pavement. The day had begun by her master, Luka Alexandrich's, putting on his hat, taking something wooden under his arm wrapped up in a red handkerchief, and calling, "Kashtanka, come along." Hearing her name, the dog had come out from under the work table, where she slept on the wood shavings, stretched herself voluptuously, and ran after her master. The people Luka Alexandrich worked for lived a very long way off, so that, before he could get to any one of them, the carpenter had several times to step into a tavern to fortify himself. Kashtanka remembered that on the way she had behaved impolitely. In her delight that she was being taken for a walk, she jumped about, dashed barking after the trains, ran into people's yards, and chased other dogs. The carpenter was continually losing sight of her, stopping and shouting for her to come back. By the time it was dusk, he was waving his arms, and he called Kashtanka to him and said to her, "You, Kashtanka, are just a mutt and nothing else." While he talked to her in that way, there was suddenly a burst of music. Kashtanka looked around and saw that a parade was coming straight towards her. The marching music was so loud, and she did not like music. It made her want to bark and run around. To her great surprise, the carpenter, instead of being frightened, gave a broad grin, drew himself up to attention, and saluted the parade as it passed. Kashtanka dashed across the road to the opposite pavement. When she recovered herself, the band was not playing, and the parade was no longer there. She ran across the road to the spot where she had left her master, but alas, the carpenter was no longer there. She dashed forward, then back again, and ran across the road once more, but the carpenter seemed to have vanished into the earth. Kashtanka ran up and down and did not find her master, and meanwhile it had got dark. Big, fluffy snowflakes were falling and painting white the pavement, the horses' backs, and the cabmen's caps, and the darker the evening grew, the whiter were all these objects. When it got quite dark, Kashtanka curled up in a protected entranceway. The long day's journeying with Luka Alexandrich had exhausted her, and she was awfully hungry. Only twice in the day had she tasted a morsel. She had eaten a little paste at the bookbinder's, and in one of the taverns she had found a sausage skin on the floor near the counter. That was all. 2. A mysterious stranger. But she thought of nothing. She had dozed off in her exhaustion all at once the door of the entrance clicked, creaked, and made her jump up. A man came out. As Kashtanka got under his feet, he could not help noticing her. He bent down to her and asked, "Doggy, where do you come from? Did I startle you? Oh, poor thing. Come, don't be cross. I am sorry." Kashtanka looked at the stranger through the snowflakes that hung on her eyelashes and saw before her a short, fat little man with a plump, shaven face, wearing a top hat and a fur coat that swung open. "Where is your master? I suppose you're lost? Aw, poor doggy. What are we going to do now?" Catching in the stranger's voice a warm, cordial tone, Kashtanka licked his hand. "Oh, you nice, funny thing," said the stranger. "A regular fox. Well, there's nothing for it. You must come along with me." He made a clicking sound with his mouth and made a sign to Kashtanka with his hand, which could only mean one thing: "Come along." Kashtanka went. Not more than half an hour later, she was sitting on the floor in a big, lit room and, leaning her head against her side, was looking with tenderness and curiosity at the stranger who was sitting at the table dining. He ate and threw pieces to her. At first he gave her bread and the green rind of cheese, then a piece of meat, half a pie, and some chicken, while through hunger she ate so quickly that she had not time to distinguish the taste. "Your masters don't feed you properly," said the stranger, seeing with what greediness she swallowed the morsels without munching them. After dinner, she lay down in the middle of the room, stretched her legs, and, conscious of an agreeable weariness all over her body, wagged her tail, while her new master, lounging in an easy chair, smoked a cigar. She wagged her tail and considered the question, whether it was better at the stranger's or at the carpenter's. The stranger's room smelt of nothing, while there was always a thick fog in the carpenter's room and a glorious smell of glue, varnish, and shavings. On the other hand, the stranger had one great superiority. He gave her a great deal to eat and, to do him full justice, when Kashtanka sat facing the table and looking wistfully at him, he did not once shout, "Go away, mutt." When he was finished with smoking his cigar, her new master went out, and a minute later came back holding a Kashtanka-sized mattress in his hands. "Hey, little dog, come here," he said, laying the mattress in the corner near the dog. "Lie down here. Go to sleep." Then he turned out the lamp and went away. Kashtanka lay down on the mattress and shut her eyes. But all at once she was overcome, thinking of old Luka Alexandrich, of his son Fedyushka, and her snug little place under the bench. She remembered on the long winter evenings when the carpenter was planing or reading the paper aloud. Fedyushka usually played with her. But soon exhaustion and warmth prevailed. She began to fall asleep. Dogs ran by in her imagination. Among them, a shaggy old poodle, whom she had seen that day in the street with a white patch on his eye and tufts of wool by his nose. Fedyushka ran after the poodle. Then all at once he too was covered with shaggy wool and began merrily barking beside Kashtanka. Kashtanka and he good-naturedly sniffed each other's noses and merrily ran down the street. 3. New and very agreeable acquaintances. When Kashtanka woke up, it was already light, and a sound rose from the street, such as only comes in the daytime. Kashtanka stretched, yawned, and walked about the room. She sniffed the corners and the furniture, looked into the passage, and found nothing of interest there. Besides the door that led into the passage, there was another door. After thinking a little, Kashtanka scratched on it with both paws, opened it, and went into the adjoining room. In the bedroom was another door, also closed. Kashtanka scratched at the door, leaned her chest against it, opened it, and was instantly aware of a strange smell. She walked in and saw something surprising. A gray gander goose came straight towards her, with its neck bowed down to the floor and its wings outspread. Not far from him, on a little cat bed, lay a white tomcat. The dog was frightened in earnest, but not caring to betray her alarm, began barking loudly and dashed at the cat. Then Kashtanka leapt up and dashed at the gander. The stranger came into the room in his dressing gown, with a cigar between his teeth. "To your places." The cat obediently lay down again on his mattress and closed his eyes. The gander craned his neck and began saying something rapidly, excitedly, distinctly, but quite unintelligibly. All right," said his master, yawning. "You must live in peace and friendship." He stroked Kashtanka and went on, "And you, Red Hair, don't be frightened. They are capital company. They won't bother you. Say, what are we to call you? You can't go on without a name, my dear." The stranger thought a moment and said, "I tell you what, you shall be Auntie. Do you understand? Auntie." And repeating the word Auntie several times, he went out. Kashtanka sat down and began watching. The cat sat motionless on his little bed and pretended to be asleep. The gander, craning his neck and stamping, went on talking rapidly and excitedly about something. Apparently, it was a very clever gander. After every tirade, he always stepped back with an air of wonder and made a show of being highly delighted with his own speech. 4. Marvels on a Hurdle. A little while afterwards, the stranger came in again and brought a strange thing with him, like a hurdle. On the crosspiece on the top of this roughly made wooden frame hung a bell, and there were strings from the tongue of the bell. The stranger put the frame in the middle of the room, spent a long time tying and untying something, then looked at the gander and said, "Ivan Ivanitch, if you please." The gander went up to him and stood in an expectant attitude. "Now then," said the stranger, "let us begin at the very beginning. First of all, bow and make a curtsy. Look sharp." Ivan Ivanitch craned his long neck, nodded in all directions, and scraped with his foot. "Right, bravo." After performing a few unimportant tricks, the stranger suddenly clutched at his head and, assuming an expression of concern, shouted, "Help! The building is on fire." Ivan Ivanitch ran to the frame, took the string in his beak, and set the bell ringing. The stranger was very much pleased. He stroked the gander's neck and said, "Bravo, Ivan Ivanitch." Kashtanka was highly delighted with the bell ringing, and it threw her into so much ecstasy that she ran round the frame, barking. "Auntie, lie down," cried the stranger. For a whole hour afterwards, the stranger drove the gander round him on a cord, and the gander had to jump over barriers and through hoops. "Come, let us begin with the Egyptian pyramid," began the master. He spent a long time explaining something, then gave the word of command, 1, 2, 3. At the word 3, Ivan Ivanitch flapped his wings. When, balancing himself with his wings and his neck, Fyodor Timofeyitch, the cat, listlessly and lazily, and with an air of scorning his art and not caring a pin for it, climbed up, then reluctantly mounted on the gander and stood on his hind legs. The result was what the stranger called the Egyptian pyramid. Kashtanka yapped with delight, but at that moment the old cat yawned and, losing his balance, rolled off the gander. Ivan Ivanitch lurched and fell off too. The stranger shouted, waved his hands, and began explaining something again. After spending an hour over the pyramid, their indefatigable master proceeded to teach Ivan Ivanitch to ride on the cat, and so on. The lesson ended in the stranger's wiping the sweat off his brow and going away. Fyodor Timofeyitch gave a disdainful sniff, lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. Ivan Ivanitch went to the trough to have lunch. Thanks to the number of her new impressions, Kashtanka hardly noticed how the day passed, and in the evening she was installed with her bed in the same room and spent the night in the society of Fyodor Timofeyich the cat and Ivan Ivanitch the gander. 5. Talent, talent. A month passed. Kashtanka had grown used to having a nice dinner every evening and being called auntie. She had grown used to the stranger, too, and to her new companions. Life was comfortable and easy. Every day began in the same way. As a rule, Ivan Ivanitch was the first to wake up and at once went up to Auntie or to the cat, twisting his neck and beginning to talk excitedly and persuasively, but, as before, unintelligibly. What was he saying? Sometimes he would crane up his neck in the air and utter a long monologue. At first, Kashtanka thought he talked so much because he was very clever. But after a little time had passed, she lost her patience for him. When he went up to her with his long speeches, she no longer wagged her tail, but treated him as a tiresome chatterbox who would not let anyone sleep in. Fyodor Timofeyich was a gentleman of a very different sort. When he woke, he did not utter a sound, did not stir, and did not even open his eyes. Nothing interested him, and he disdained everything, even his delicious dinner. When she woke, Kashtanka began walking about the room and sniffing the corners. She and the cat were the only ones allowed to go all over the flat. The gander had not the right to cross the threshold of the room. Their master got up late, and immediately after drinking his tea, began teaching them their tricks. Every day, almost the same performance took place. The lesson lasted 3 or 4 hours, so that by the end of it, they were all completely exhausted, including the stranger. The lesson and the dinner made the day very interesting, but the evenings were calm. Left alone, Auntie lay down on her little mattress and relaxed. Kashtanka became homesick when she would rest in quiet. She imagined vague figures, half dogs, half human beings, with countenances attractive, pleasant, but incomprehensible, that would appear in her imagination. When they came, Auntie wagged her tail, and it seemed to her that she had somewhere, at some time, seen them and loved them. And as she dropped asleep, she always felt that those figures smelt of glue, shavings, and varnish. When she had grown quite used to her new life, and from a thin mutt had changed into a sleek, well-groomed dog, Her master looked at her one day before the lesson and said, "It's high time, Auntie, to get to business. I want to make an artiste of you. Do you want to be an artiste?" And he began teaching her various accomplishments. At the first lesson, he taught her to stand and walk on her hind legs, which she liked extremely. After that, in the following lessons, she danced, ran tied to a cord, howled to music, rang the bell, and in a month could successfully replace Fyodor Timofeyich the gander in the Egyptian pyramid. She learned very eagerly and was pleased with her own success, and, riding on old Fyodor Timofeyich, gave her the greatest enjoyment. She accompanied every successful trick with a delighted bark, while her teacher was also delighted. It's talent, he said. Unquestionable talent. You will certainly be successful. And Auntie grew so used to the word talent that every time her master pronounced it, she jumped up as if it had been her name. 6. A particular evening. Auntie was dreaming her doggy dreams. It was quite dark in the room. Her master heaved a loud sigh in the next room, and then all was still again. Auntie shut her eyes to go to sleep as quickly as possible, for she knew by experience that the sooner you go to sleep, the sooner the morning comes. All at once, there was a strange honking not far from her, which made her jump up on all four legs. It was Ivan Ivanitch. Unable to distinguish anything in the darkness, the dog lay back down. Some time passed, and it had been silent. Little by little, Auntie began to doze, and all at once there was again a honking. Then there was the sound of shuffling slippers, and the master came into the room in his dressing gown with a candle in his hand. Auntie heard her master cry that Ivan Ivanitch had run away, and she followed her master into his bedroom. He sat down on the bed and repeated several times, "Oh dear, what's to be done?" Auntie walked about round his feet, watched every movement he made. Fyodor Timofeyich, who rarely left his little mattress, came into the master's bedroom too, and began rubbing himself against his feet. "I already miss Ivan Ivanitch," said the master, sighing. "And I was just dreaming I would take him in the spring into the country and would walk with him on the green grass. How shall I do it without you now?" Auntie went under the sofa and sat down there to think about the goose that had run away, and wondered if the goose had been trying to tell her something all along. 7. A debut. One fine evening, the master came into the room and, rubbing his hands, said, "Today I shall take with me Auntie and Fyodor Timofeyich. Today, Auntie, you will take the place of the missing Ivan Ivanitch in the Egyptian pyramid. Goodness knows how it will be. Nothing is ready. Nothing has been thoroughly studied. There have been few rehearsals." Then he went out again, and a minute later came back in his fur coat and top hat. Going up to the cat, he put him inside the front of his coat, while Fyodor Timofeyich appeared completely unconcerned and did not even trouble to open his eyes. To him, it was apparently a matter of absolute indifference whether he rested on his bed or under his master's fur coat. "Come along, Auntie," said her master. Wagging her tail and understanding nothing, Auntie followed him. A minute later, she was sitting in a sled by her master's feet. The sled stopped at a big, strange-looking house. The long entrance to this house, with its 3 glass doors, was lighted up with a dozen brilliant lamps. There were a great many people. There were no dogs to be seen, though. The master took Auntie in his arms and thrust her in his coat, where Fyodor Timofeyich already was. It was dark and warm. For an instant, 2 green sparks flashed at her. It was the cat. Auntie licked his ear and, trying to settle herself as comfortably as possible, poked her head out of the coat, but at once tucked it in again. In another moment, the coat was flung open. The master said, "Hop," and Fyodor Timofeyich and Auntie jumped to the floor. They were now in a little room with gray plank walls. Their master sat down on the stool and, looking in the mirror, began playing the most surprising tricks with himself. First of all, he put on his head a wig, a mustache, and red on his cheeks. His antics did not end with that. He put on a bright tailcoat, red with gold trim, and with a waistcoat, a black top hat, and a bow tie. Somewhere through the wall, a loud band was playing, and from time to time, Auntie heard the roar of an audience. Only one thing reassured her. That was the imperturbability of Fyodor Timofeyich. He dozed with the utmost tranquility under the stool and did not open his eyes even when it was moved. "Ringmaster George, you're up," someone shouted behind the door. Their master got up and took the cat from under the stool and put him in a box. "Come, Auntie," he said softly. Auntie, who could make nothing out of what was happening, went up to his hands. He kissed her on the head and put her gently beside Fyodor Timofeyich. The box swayed and quivered as though it were on waves. Here we are again, her master shouted aloud. There was a loud, deep roar from the audience. Honored friends, there is something very heavy in the box. It must be gold. I bet there's $1 million in there. We'll open it and look. The lock of the box clicked. The bright light dazzled Auntie's eyes. She jumped out of the box and, deafened by the audience's roar, ran quickly round her master and broke into a bark. The master embraced both the cat and Auntie. While he held Auntie tight in his arms, she glanced round into the world into which fate had brought her, and, impressed by its immensity, was for a minute dumbfounded with amazement and delight, then jumped out of her master's arms and, to express the intensity of her emotions, whirled round and round on one spot like a top. This new world was big and full of bright light. Auntie, I beg you to sit down, shouted her master. Remembering what that meant, Auntie jumped onto a chair and sat down. She looked at her master. His eyes looked at her kindly, as always. He made a show of being very merry in the presence of the thousands of faces. Auntie believed in his merriment. All at once felt all over that those thousands of faces were looking at her, lifted up her fox-like head, and howled joyously. You sit there, Auntie, her master said to her, while Uncle and I will dance the Kamarinsky. Fyodor Timofeyich stood looking about him indifferently, waiting to be made to do something silly. He danced listlessly, carelessly, sullenly, and one could see from his movements, his tail and his ears, that he had a profound contempt for the crowd, the bright light, his master, and himself. When he had performed his allotted task, he gave a yawn and sat down. Now, Auntie, said her master, we'll have a first song, then a dance, shall we? He took a pipe out of his pocket and began playing. Auntie, who did not enjoy music, began howling. A roar of applause rose from all sides. Her master bowed, and when all was still again, went on playing. Just as he took one very high note, someone high up among the audience uttered a loud exclamation. Auntie, cried a child's voice. Why, it's Kashtanka. Kashtanka it is, declared a cracked tenor. Vedyushka, it is Kashtanka. Kashtanka, here. Someone in the gallery gave a whistle, and two voices, one a boy's and one a man's, called loudly, Kashtanka, Kashtanka. Auntie started and looked where the shouting came from. Two faces, one hairy and grinning, The other, chubby and rosy-cheeked, dazed her eyes as the bright light had dazed them before. She remembered, fell off the chair, and with a delighted yap dashed towards those faces. There was a deafening roar, interspersed with whistles and a shrill, childish shout. Kashtanka! Kashtanka! Auntie leapt over the barrier, then across someone's shoulders. She was passed from hand to hand. She licked hands and faces, kept climbing higher and higher, and at last got into the gallery. Half an hour afterwards, Kashtanka was in the street, following the people who smelt of glue and varnish. Luka Alexandrich staggered and muttered, "And you, Kashtanka, are just a mutt." Fedyushka walked beside him, wearing his father's cap. Kashtanka looked at their backs, and it seemed to her that she had been following them for ages, and was glad that there had not been a break for a minute in her life. She remembered the gander, Fyodor Timofeyich, the delicious dinners, the lessons, the circus. But all that seemed to her now